You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. The chrome letters on the office door read, Meridian Cargo Transport, in faded blue paint that had been baking in the desert sun for decades. I pushed through, boots echoing on worn linoleum that stuck to my soles from years of accumulated grime and heat. The air conditioning unit in the corner wheezed like an old man's lungs, spitting out lukewarm air that barely cut through the scorching Mojave afternoon pressing against the windows. You must be Caspian Thorne. The voice emerged from behind a gunmetal desk that looked like it belonged in a 1970s police station. The man sitting there had skin like cracked leather, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen too much desert sun and not enough sleep. His nameplate read, Voss Hendrik, Operations Manager, in letters that had been rubbed nearly smooth by countless nervous fingers. That's me, I said, extending my hand. His grip was firm, but his palm was damp despite the air conditioning. Appreciate you taking me on. Word is, you've got some decent paying routes out here. Voss gestured to a metal folding chair that squeaked when I sat down. The fabric seat was torn in 3 places, exposing yellow foam underneath. We need to have a conversation before you take your first run, son. Something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. I'd been driving trucks for 12 years, hauled everything from fresh produce to industrial machinery across 48 states. From the frozen highways of Montana to the humid backroads of Louisiana. I thought I'd seen every kind of dispatcher, every type of route, every variety of road hazard the trucking industry could throw at a driver. I was wrong. Voss opened his desk drawer with trembling fingers and pulled out a laminated card that had been handled so many times the edges were worn soft. He slid it across the desk toward me, and I noticed his hand shook slightly as he let go. These are your route safety protocols, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Read them, memorize them, follow them, exactly. The card felt unnaturally heavy in my hands, like it was made of lead instead of plastic. 8 rules were printed in bold black letters that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light. Rule 1, never drive this route between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Park and sleep. Instead, Rule 2, if you see a hitchhiker wearing all black clothing, do not stop under any circumstances. Rule 3, when passing mile marker 247, honk your horn 3 times and flash your headlights twice. Rule 4, if your CB radio starts playing classical music, immediately switch to channel 19 and stay there. Rule 5, never leave your truck unattended at Phantom's Perch rest stop between sunset and sunrise. Rule 6, if you see another truck following the exact same speed as you for more than 20 minutes, take the next exit. Rule 7, keep your windows up and doors locked between mile markers 180, 190. Rule 8, if you smell roses while driving through the desert, pull over immediately and wait 30 minutes before continuing. I read through them twice, waiting for Voss to crack a smile or admit this was some elaborate practical joke. Instead, he pulled out a thick, leather-bound logbook that looked like it had survived a fire. The cover was singed around the edges and water stains had warped the pages. Take a look at this, he said, opening it to a random page. The logbook contained driver entries dating back 5 years. Names, dates, times, cargo manifests, route notes, normal trucking paperwork. But as I flipped through the pages, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The entries stopped. Not gradually, not with explanations, or transfers to other routes. They just ended, mid-sentence sometimes, as if the drivers had simply vanished while writing. Worse were the pages marked with red ink, in Voss's careful handwriting, deceased, apparent heart attack stamped across entire sections. Chester Grimwald, age 34, found dead in his cab at mile marker 186. Coroner said massive heart attack, no signs of struggle. Voss turned the page. Diana Fletcher, age 29. Same thing, mile marker 203. Healthy as a horse according to her last DOT physical. Page after page, the pattern repeated. 7 drivers in the past 3 years. All found dead in their trucks. All between mile markers 180 and 250. All ruled natural causes despite being young, healthy individuals with no history of heart problems. What you're not telling me, I said slowly, is what really happened to them. Voss closed the logbook and leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. The route pays triple normal rates, Caspian. Triple. You know why? Because most drivers won't take it twice. The ones who do follow those rules exactly. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no creative interpretations. He opened another drawer and pulled out a manila folder thick with photographs. The first one showed a truck cab with its driver's side door hanging open, a body slumped over the steering wheel. The man's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, mouth open as if he'd been screaming when his heart stopped. The ones who don't follow the rules end up like this. I studied the photograph more carefully. No visible injuries, no defensive wounds, just fear. Pure primal terror, the kind that stops a human heart. Voss tucked the photos back into the folder. I've been dispatching drivers on this route for 8 years, son. I've seen good men reduced to corpses by whatever haunts that stretch of highway. Whatever. Voss's eyes went distant, staring past me towards the window that looked out on the empty desert. There are things in the Mojave that don't make it into guidebooks or GPS systems. Things that have been there longer than the highways, longer than the towns, maybe longer than the people who first walked across that sand. I pocketed the laminated card and stood up. When do I start? 4 days later, I was climbing into the cab of my Peterbilt at 4:30 a.m., checking mirrors and gauges in the pre-dawn darkness that seemed thicker than usual. The load was standard freight, electronics components bound for Las Vegas, but the route required Highway 127 through the heart of the Mojave Desert, the highway with the rules. My truck was a 2019 model with all the modern conveniences: GPS navigation, satellite radio, automatic transmission, air-conditioned sleeper berth, comfortable enough for long hauls, reliable enough for desert driving. I'd driven her over 300,000 miles without a single breakdown. The morning hours passed peacefully. Desert landscape rolled by in endless variations of brown and tan, dotted with Joshua trees that looked like ancient scarecrows against the pale sky. Mountains wavered in the distance like mirages, their peaks lost in heat, shimmer even though the sun hadn't reached its full strength. But something felt different about this stretch of highway. The other routes I'd driven through desert country had a certain emptiness, a natural loneliness that came with wide open spaces. This felt actively hostile, like the landscape itself was watching me drive through it. Mile marker 247 appeared ahead. A simple white rectangle with black numbers that somehow seemed more significant than it should. I glanced at the laminated card clipped to my visor and followed Rule 3 exactly. 3 long blasts of my air horn, 2 flashes of my headlights. As I passed the marker, a movement caught my eye in the passenger mirror. A black sedan had appeared on a dirt road that branched off from the highway, parked at an angle that gave the driver a clear view of passing traffic. The car had definitely not been there 30 seconds earlier. I checked my speedometer and maintained exactly 65 miles per hour, fighting the urge to accelerate away from whatever was watching me from that sedan. The afternoon heat became oppressive as I continued east. Even with the air conditioning running full blast, sweat beaded on my forehead and soaked through my shirt. The thermometer on my dashboard read 118 degrees outside, hot enough to kill an unprotected person in hours. As evening approached, I saw the exit sign for Phantom's Perch rest stop with 43 minutes of daylight remaining according to my GPS. The parking lot contained maybe 15 trucks arranged in rough rows, their drivers moving with an urgency that seemed unusual for a routine fuel stop. I parked between a faded blue Kenworth and a newer Freightliner, shut down my engine, and climbed out to stretch my legs. The heat hit me like opening an oven door. Dry and immediate, and overwhelming. The Kenworth's driver emerged from his truck as I was checking my tyres. He was a wiry man in his 50s with prematurely grey hair and eyes that never stopped scanning the horizon. His movements were nervous, economical, like someone who'd learned to conserve energy in dangerous situations. "First time through?" he asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. "Yeah, name's Caspian Thorne. Rigby Velasco. Been running this stretch for 3 years." He glanced at his watch, a battered Timex with a cracked face. "Sun'll be down in 38 minutes. You better get back inside your cab." "What's the big deal about sunset?" Rigby's expression darkened, and he looked around the parking lot as if checking for eavesdroppers. Most of the other drivers had already retreated to their trucks, engines running, air conditioners humming. "The rules aren't about superstition, kid. They're about him." "Him?" Draven Kane. Rigby's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Used to drive trucks like us, ran this route for Meridian Cargo before your time. Something in his head snapped about 5 years ago. Now he owns this stretch of highway." A chill ran down my spine despite the desert heat. "Owns it how?" He monitors CB frequencies on channel 9 and 19. Follows trucks that don't follow his protocols. Studies drivers, learns their names, their routes, their habits. Rigby climbed back toward his truck, but paused with his hand on the door handle. "The rules on that card you're carrying?" He wrote every single one, learned them the hard way, watching drivers die when they broke his commandments. "You're talking about the guy who's been killing people?" "I'm talking about the guy who is the desert now. Follow those rules exactly, Caspian. Don't try to outsmart them, don't look for loopholes. Don't assume you know better." Rigby's voice carried the weight of hard experience. "Your life depends on absolute obedience." I watched him disappear into his truck as the sun touched the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded me uncomfortably of fire. One by one, the other truckers sealed themselves inside their cabs. The parking lot fell silent except for the collective hum of diesel engines and air conditioning units working overtime against the desert night. I spent that first night in my sleeper berth, staring at the ceiling and listening for sounds that didn't belong. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the gravel outside, slow and deliberate, circling the truck. They continued for exactly 1 hour, then stopped abruptly. When morning came, I found no footprints in the sand around my truck. My second run came 6 days later, this time requiring an overnight segment that would test Rule 1. At 1:43 a.m, I pulled into a designated rest area 30 miles past Phantom's Perch and shut down my engine. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than any quiet I'd experienced. As I prepared to climb into my sleeper berth, headlights appeared in my mirrors. Another truck was approaching from the west, maintaining highway speed despite the late hour. I checked my watch. 1:47 a.m. The truck passed my rest area without slowing down, its taillights disappearing into the darkness ahead. I pulled out the laminated card and confirmed Rule 1. Never drive this route between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. At 3:27 a.m, my CB radio exploded with static, then a voice screaming in absolute terror. "He's in the truck! He's in the truck with me!" "Oh God, he's..." The transmission cut to silence. The next morning's news reported a truck driver found dead in his cab at mile marker 183. Gerald Hoffman, age 41, apparently died of a massive heart attack while driving. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. The truck had come to rest perfectly centered in the right lane, as if someone had carefully steered it to a stop after the driver's death. During my third run, I encountered Rule 4 for the first time. I was approaching mile marker 200 when classical music began flowing through my CB radio, replacing the usual chatter and static. The piece was hauntingly beautiful, a violin concerto that seemed impossible to hear in the middle of the desert. I immediately switched to channel 19 as the rule demanded, my hands shaking slightly as I turned the dial. A calm, measured voice came through the speaker. "Good evening, Caspian. You're learning." Every muscle in my body went rigid. Someone had been watching me, studying me, learning my name, and tracking my movements across the desert. The voice continued, cultured and patient. "Most drivers don't make it past their second run. They panic, they take shortcuts, they convince themselves the rules are optional." A soft chuckle. "You show discipline. I respect that." I gripped the steering wheel and maintained my speed, afraid that any deviation from normal driving patterns might trigger something worse than conversation. The desert teaches patience, Caspian. It strips away pretense, reveals character. You'll understand soon enough. The voice faded back to static, leaving me alone with the sound of my engine and the whistle of wind around my cab. That night, I called Voss from a truck stop in Barstow. "He talked to me," I said without preamble. Silence on the other end of the line, then a heavy sigh. "What did he say?" "He knew my name. He's been watching me." I looked around the truck stop, suddenly paranoid that every shadow might conceal an observer. "Voss, what the hell have you gotten me into?" "The most dangerous route in North America," he said quietly, "but also the most profitable. Stick to the rules, Caspian. Don't try to be a hero." On my fourth run, Draven Kane began leaving personal messages. I found the first one tucked under my windshield wiper at a fuel stop in Baker. "You're adapting well to desert discipline. Most never learn." The second note was slipped into my door handle while I was inside paying for fuel. "Fear is wisdom in the Mojave. Embrace it." The third appeared on my dashboard somehow, even though I'd locked the truck. Everyone makes mistakes eventually. The desert forgives nothing. Each message was written in precise handwriting on desert sand-colored paper that felt ancient beneath my fingers. I began checking my truck obsessively before driving, looking for signs of tampering or sabotage, but I never found anything. During my passage through mile markers 180, 190, I experienced Rule 7 firsthand. As required, I kept my windows up and doors locked, air conditioning running to maintain a barrier between myself and whatever waited outside. The tapping began at mile marker 182. Soft at first, like fingernails against glass coming from the passenger window. I refused to look, keeping my eyes fixed on the yellow lines of the highway ahead. The tapping grew more insistent, moving around the cab to my driver's side window, then to the windshield. Draven Kane's voice drifted through the CB radio. "Just one look, Caspian. See what you're hiding from. Understand what shares this desert with you." The tapping became rhythmic, almost musical, as if he was playing a complex pattern against the metal and glass of my truck. I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to reach mile marker 190 and end this psychological torture. At mile marker 189, something large struck my windshield with enough force to spider the glass. I flinched instinctively, but maintained my forward stare. Whatever had hit the truck was now sliding across the hood, creating a scraping sound like fingernails on metal. Mile marker 190 appeared ahead like salvation. The moment I passed it, all sounds stopped. My CB radio returned to normal chatter. The scraping and tapping ceased, as if they had never happened. I didn't stop until I reached Las Vegas, where I spent an hour in a truck stop parking lot shaking and chain-smoking cigarettes I bought from a vending machine. On my 7th run, I encountered Rule 8. The scent began subtly, somewhere between mile markers 225 and 230. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Roses in the middle of the Mojave desert made no sense, but the fragrance grew stronger, impossibly sweet and cloying, until it filled my cab despite the closed windows and recirculated air. I pulled over immediately and shut off my engine. Draven Kane emerged from behind a cluster of Joshua trees, about 50 yards away, walking toward my truck with unhurried confidence. In the moonlight, he looked younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the lean build of someone who'd spent years in physical labor. He wore faded jeans and a desert camouflage jacket that had seen better days, but his eyes were what made my blood freeze. Pale blue, almost colorless, with a depth that suggested he'd seen things no human should witness. As he approached my truck, those eyes never left mine, even through the windshield and the darkness. For exactly 30 minutes he circled my truck like a predator, studying prey. He didn't attempt to open doors or break windows. He simply walked, patient and methodical, occasionally stopping to press his palm against the metal of my trailer or trace patterns in the sand with his boot. Sometimes he would pause directly in front of my windshield and stare at me with those colorless eyes, his expression unreadable. I sat perfectly still, hands gripped on the steering wheel, afraid that any movement might be interpreted as aggression or an attempt to flee. When 30 minutes had passed exactly, he smiled a thin smile that held no warmth, nodded once, as if acknowledging my obedience, and walked back into the desert. The scent of roses faded gradually, leaving only the familiar smells of leather and diesel and recycled air. I sat in that truck for another hour before I trusted myself to start the engine. By my 9th run, I thought I understood the system. Draven Kane was a predator, but a rational one. He'd established rules that allowed him to hunt while giving potential victims a chance to survive, follow the protocols exactly, show proper respect for his territory, and live to drive another day. It was a business relationship in its own twisted way. He got to maintain control over his hunting ground, and careful drivers got to make triple normal wages for accepting the risk. I was wrong about the rationality part. Everything proceeded normally until I reached Phantom's Perch rest stop just as the sun kissed the western mountains. I parked in my usual spot between the blue Kenworth and a newer Peterbilt, following my established routine. Check the truck, secure the load, prepare to spend the night in compliance with Rule 5. My phone rang as I was settling into my sleeper berth. The caller ID showed my father's number, which sent an immediate spike of adrenaline through my system. Dad was a stoic man who rarely called unless something was seriously wrong. I answered on the second ring. Caspian? His voice was strained, thick with an emotion I'd rarely heard from him. Thank God you picked up. Dad, what's wrong? I'm at Mercy General Hospital. Your mother collapsed at the grocery store this afternoon. They think it's her heart. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Mum had been fighting cardiovascular problems for 3 years, managing the condition with medication and lifestyle changes. But she'd been stable, optimistic, making plans for retirement and grandchildren she hoped to spoil someday. Is she conscious? Can I talk to her? She's in surgery now. The doctors are trying to clear a blockage in her main artery. His voice cracked. Son, I need you to know how much she loves you, how proud she is of everything you've accomplished. Dad, don't talk like that. She's going to be fine. The doctors know what they're doing. The reception is terrible in this hospital. Can you hear me clearly? Caspian. The call was breaking up, his voice fading in and out through static. I stood up in my sleeper berth, checking the signal strength on my phone. 2 bars, which should have been adequate for a clear conversation. "Dad, I'm here. Tell me exactly what the doctor said." More static. His voice became a garbled mess of syllables and electronic noise. Desperate to maintain contact, I opened my truck door and stepped outside to get better reception. The desert night air hit me like a slap, dry and cold despite the lingering heat radiating from the asphalt. I took several steps away from my truck, holding my phone high, searching for a stronger signal. "Dad, can you hear me now?" His voice came through clearer. "The surgery could take hours. They won't know anything until morning." I continued walking, drawn away from my truck by the desperate need to hear every word about my mother's condition. 20 feet from my cab, then 30, then 40, my attention completely focused on the phone conversation. "Is there anything I can do? Should I try to get there?" "Stay safe, son. Keep driving. Your mother would want you to keep working, keep building your life." A shadow fell across me from behind. "Rules exist for a reason, son." I spun around to find Draven Kane standing between me and my truck, close enough that I could see the details of his face in the parking lot security lights. Up close, he was even more intimidating than I'd remembered. Tall and rangy, with the patient stillness of a desert predator, wearing the same camouflage jacket, but now I could see it was stained with dark patches that might have been blood. In his right hand, he held a device that looked like a modified cattle prod, its business end crackling with electrical energy that cast blue shadows on the ground. "I only stepped out for a minute," I said, backing away from him. "Rule 5, he said calmly, advancing at the same pace I retreated. "Never leave your truck unattended at Phantom's Perch rest stop between sunset and sunrise. You've been so careful, Caspian. So disciplined. But everyone breaks eventually." I dropped my phone and ran for my truck. But Kane was faster than his casual demeanour suggested. The cattle prod caught me between the shoulder blades, sending 50,000 volts through my nervous system. Every muscle in my body contracted simultaneously, and I collapsed face first onto the asphalt. Pain exploded through my chest as my heart struggled against the electrical interference. I gasped for breath that wouldn't come, my diaphragm paralysed by the sustained shock. Kane knelt beside me, his pale eyes reflecting the parking lot lights. "The desert keeps its own justice," he whispered, his voice almost gentle. "I don't make these rules arbitrarily, son. Every protocol exists because someone died learning why it was necessary." He showed me the modified cattle prod, pointing out the copper contacts and voltage regulator he'd added to the original design. 50,000 volts applied to the nervous system creates the same cardiac stress as a massive heart attack. The coroners never find anything suspicious. My vision was starting to darken around the edges, but I could still hear him talking, explaining his methodology with the pride of a craftsman discussing his work. "The hitchhiker rule exists because I used to pose as a stranded motorist. The mile marker 247 signal alerts other drivers that I'm hunting in the area. The classical music means I've selected a target." He paused to check my pulse, nodding with satisfaction at what he found. "The rose scent comes from a chemical compound I developed. It marks territorial boundaries that shouldn't be crossed." I tried to speak to ask why he was doing this, but my vocal cords wouldn't respond. Kane seemed to understand the question anyway. 5 years ago, I was driving this route for Meridian Cargo. Night run, same as you. Found a family broken down on the side of the highway. Mother, father, 2 little girls. Their radiator had overheated, and they were stranded without water in 120-degree heat. He stood up and began dragging my body toward my truck, arranging me in the driver's seat with practiced efficiency. I stopped to help them, naturally. Gave them water, called for a tow truck, stayed with them until help arrived. 2 hours later, I was behind schedule and driving through that stretch between mile markers 180 to 190 inches. Kane adjusted my hands on the steering wheel, positioned my head against the headrest, made it look like I'd suffered a heart attack while driving, and managed to pull over safely. Another truck had broken down in the same area. Driver was lying beside his rig, clutching his chest, clearly having a heart attack. I stopped again, called for an ambulance, tried to perform CPR. His voice became distant, remembering. He died in my arms while we waited for help that came too late. He placed my phone on the passenger seat, making sure it looked like I'd been trying to make a call when the attack hit. That's when I understood the desert's lesson. Compassion is weakness. Helping others delays your own survival. The Mojave doesn't reward kindness, it punishes hesitation. My heart was stuttering now, struggling to maintain rhythm against the electrical damage. Kane checked his watch and nodded with satisfaction. The rules I created aren't about cruelty, Caspian. They're about natural selection. Drivers who can follow instructions exactly, who can suppress their human instincts in favor of disciplined obedience, deserve to survive. The rest become object lessons for the next generation. He stepped back from my truck and surveyed his work, making sure everything appeared natural. In the distance, I could hear my father's voice still calling from the dropped phone, asking if I was still there, if I could hear him. Your mother will recover from her surgery, Kane said quietly. She'll live another 15 years, wondering why her son died alone in the desert. That's the price of breaking rules in my territory. The last thing I saw was Kane walking away into the darkness, disappearing between the parked trucks like a ghost returning to whatever hell had spawned him. When the coroner found me the next morning, he recorded the cause of death as massive cardiac arrest, brought on by the stress of long-distance driving and an apparent family emergency. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just another trucker who couldn't handle the pressure of life on the road. The insurance company paid out my policy without question. Meridian Cargo sent flowers to my funeral. Voss Hendrik added my name to his leather logbook, another entry in his catalogue of drivers who'd learned the rules too late. 3 weeks after my death, Voss sat across from a new driver, sliding a familiar laminated card across his scarred desk. These are your route safety protocols, he said in a voice heavy with repetition and loss. Read them carefully, memorize them, follow them exactly. The new driver, a young man named Tobias Crane, picked up the card and studied the 8 rules with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered true predation. This some kind of company policy? Tobias asked. Voss shook his head slowly, opened his logbook to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. These aren't company policies, son. They're survival guidelines. Outside the office window, the Mojave Desert stretched endlessly toward distant mountains, its sand hiding the bones of drivers who'd thought they were smarter than the rules. Somewhere in those empty spaces, Draven Kane continued his patient hunt, monitoring CB frequencies and waiting for the next trucker to make that one fatal mistake. The rules remain unchanged. The consequences are absolute, and the desert keeps its secrets buried in silence and sand, where compassion goes to die, and only obedience survives the hunt.